I didn't weep when I learned he had taken my bonus. I didn't weep when he assigned my project to another person. But I did weep the night I discovered a voicemail from my mother, one I had overlooked because I was at the office, coding away on her final birthday. That was the evening it dawned on me that I had been rendered a ghost in the very machine I had helped construct. My name is Sharon. I'm 37 years old, and for the past 8 years, I served as the principal solutions architect at an emerging tech company in Denver, not the public face of the business, not the keynote speaker at industry events, but the individual people sought out when something genuinely needed to function. I never engaged in office politics. I had no interest in being recognized. What was important to me was creating something tangible, something with the capacity to grow, something that addressed real-world challenges. 6 months ago, Raymond, our CEO, invited me into a confidential meeting. He always possessed that practiced charm you get from leadership podcasts. He informed me of an opportunity, a revolutionary project, a potential multi-million-dollar contract with a digital health corporation. He said, "Sharon, I need someone I can rely on, someone who can steer this discreetly." There would be no formal announcement. The project needed to remain confidential, off the books. I would be the designer, the mind behind it, the one establishing the entire technical foundation. "And if you accomplish this," he added, "there's a performance bonus, and stock options as well." He concluded with, "Let's just say, this could be the final position you ever need to accept. I didn't request any documentation. I should have. But after 8 years, a sense of loyalty can cloud your reason, and a part of me desperately wanted to believe that my value was finally being seen. So, I began the work. For 6 months, I invested my entire being into that platform. I engineered a protected data integration system, capable of managing patient records across 5 states. I rebuilt the back-end services from the ground up. I canceled a planned vacation. I worked through weekends. I was absent for dinner with my daughter 3 nights a week. I can still recall one specific night. I had just returned home around 2:30 a.m., utterly exhausted and depleted. I checked my phone and saw a missed video call from my daughter with a note. "Hi, Mommy. Are you coming to my school play tomorrow? I saved you a seat in the middle so you can see my part, but I had another call scheduled for 6 a.m., so I set my alarm, shut my eyes, and promised myself that after this project, things would be different. They were not. 3 weeks after we secured the $3 million contract, yes, Raymond's replies to my emails ceased. The performance bonus? It never materialized. The stock options? No written agreement, HR stated. The credit? A junior analyst was presented as the technical visionary at the company's investor showcase. That's when a part of me started to fracture, not from rage, not immediately, but from the silent pain of being erased. I didn't just create the platform. I offered it my time, my well-being, and family moments I could never reclaim. And the man I had put my faith in didn't even have the decency to say thank you. Or perhaps he did. Perhaps the forgetting was intentional. I attempted to remain composed. I tried to convince myself it was an error, that Raymond's silence was only temporary, that HR simply needed more time to resolve everything. I even allowed a few more days to pass, showing up, participating in meetings, and continuing to guide my team as if everything was normal. It was not. One Friday afternoon, I knocked on Raymond's office door. He didn't raise his head. "Have a minute?" He gestured, still typing. I stood there, hands clasped, trying to keep my voice from trembling. I wanted to follow up on the bonus we talked about. The equity. It's been nearly a month since the launch, and Raymond interrupted me with a half-chuckle. "Oh, that." He finally met my gaze. "Sharon, you've performed well. Truly. But I believe there's been a misunderstanding." I blinked. A misunderstanding. There was no formal contract. No signed paperwork. I said we would discuss it after the project's completion. Not that it was a certainty. My stomach plunged. I said many things." He cut in again. smiling as if it were all a game. We were under immense pressure, and you stepped up. But ultimately, we need to evaluate performance across the entire organization, not just a single project. And with that, everything I had created, everything I had given up, was brushed aside, as if it held no significance. I departed from his office with a rigid smile. I walked past the colleagues with whom I had worked late nights, past the reception, where I used to leave treats for the interns, past the framed photograph of our team from the previous year's retreat, the one Raymond had tasked me with organizing. By Monday, the situation had deteriorated. I was excluded from the client email chains. The engineering lead began reporting to a different manager. My access to the codebase I had authored was revoked for restructuring reasons. And then I saw it. At the monthly company update, a new person stood before my work. Leo, a junior developer, bright, ambitious, but barely a year out of university, was introduced by Raymond as the rising star who architected our latest success in health tech. I felt my chest constrict. My name was not spoken, not even once. I exited the meeting prematurely and sat in the stairwell for over an hour, replaying his words. The rising star who architected our latest success, my system, my 6 months, my sleepless nights, and now, his moment in the spotlight. I began waking at 4 a.m. with panic attacks, not because of the lost bonus, but because something more fundamental had been taken, my dignity, my sense of self-worth. It's difficult to convey to those who haven't gone through it what it feels like to pour your essence into something, only to have it quietly written out of existence, while others applaud. I recall driving home one evening, the radio silent, the city lights a blur through my tears. I murmured aloud, what if I was never really here at all? That night, I opened my laptop, resolved to begin documenting everything. Emails, code commits, project plans. Not for retaliation, not yet. Simply for my own clarity, for closure. That's when I saw it. A legal memo I had bookmarked months prior, when the project was just starting. In the absence of a signed IP transfer agreement, the intellectual property remains the default property of the creator. My fingers paused over the trackpad, and suddenly, the erasure no longer felt so absolute. I couldn't get that single sentence out of my mind. In the absence of a signed IP transfer agreement, it echoed in my thoughts, like a soft chime in a dark corridor. Faint, but clear. I didn't entirely grasp its implications yet, but I was certain of one thing. This situation wasn't merely unfair, it was fundamentally wrong. Still, that insight didn't halt the slow, persistent humiliation that ensued. The following week, Leo, yes, the rising star, was officially promoted to product innovation lead. That had been my de facto role for almost 2 years. He was moved into the corner office adjacent to Raymond's. They even had his nameplate prepared, a polished gold plate with sharp black lettering. Leo Rhodes, innovation lead. I stood in the hallway, coffee mug in hand, staring at that nameplate as if I'd been struck in public. I managed a smile as he passed. Hey, Sharon, he said. Hope you're okay with this. They just asked me to start taking over some of your documentation. Raymond mentioned you'd be stepping back. Stepping back? I hadn't been informed of anything. No meeting, no email, not even a quick message. I was simply being replaced, too stunned to reply. I went to my desk, my hands trembling, and struggled to recall what I had even come in to work on. Messages were pouring in about minor bugs, updates, and design suggestions. I responded to all of them, like a phantom trying to demonstrate I still existed. That afternoon, I received an invitation for an internal leadership luncheon. I was the only department head not included on the guest list. I gazed at the screen for a long moment before shutting my laptop and walking out of the building. That night, I retrieved an old photo album from a shelf. It was from my daughter's first year of daycare, back when I was still working part-time, and attended every performance, every celebration, every parent event. Her chubby, paint-covered fingers, her tiny sneakers, her wide grin when she spotted me in the audience. My God, what had I become? At some point, I had exchanged being present for the promise of being valued, and now I possessed neither. A few days later, the final insult arrived. It was an all-hands meeting. Raymond was presenting our company's innovation strategy to the board and senior leadership. The lights went down. A video began to play, a polished, professionally produced montage of our healthcare platform launch. It featured elegant UI designs, data visualizations, beaming clients, and Leo in every single shot. He was explaining the system I had conceived, gesturing to the infrastructure I had engineered, and using my precise phrasing from earlier presentations. He even had the audacity to replicate my hand gestures. I could feel the heat rise in my face. It was unbearable. The disrespect, the erasure, the betrayal. It was all too much. I left before the applause began. I couldn't stand to hear it. I drove for hours that night, with no particular destination, just the open highway and the rhythm of my own breath. Too furious to cry and too exhausted to shout, I found myself parked in front of my mother's former house, the one we sold after her passing. I hadn't been back. I sat in the car, looking at the darkened windows, and recalled her voice. She once said to me, "If they take credit for your work, they've taken a small thing. If they take your belief in your own abilities, they've taken everything." In that instant, it became clear Raymond hadn't stolen my achievement. He had stolen my recognition of it, and I had allowed him to. The next morning, something changed. I got to the office before everyone else and sat in the break room, staring at the coffee machine as if it held the answer. Instead, I opened my laptop and returned to that legal memo. This time, I didn't just glance at it. I studied every clause, every sentence, every precedent. I began making copies of files, prototypes, and time-stamped drafts. I uploaded different versions to a personal cloud drive. I archived emails, conversations, and screenshots of Slack channels. Not for payback. Not yet. But because I had finally recalled what I'd lost sight of while trying to be appreciated, accepted, and part of the group. I built this. Not Raymond. Not Leo. Me. And perhaps, just perhaps, I still held more control than I realized. Anger doesn't always show up with a roar. Sometimes it materializes quietly, like a low vibration beneath the surface, a surge of clarity that brings everything into sharp focus. That's how it felt the morning I entered the office, coffee in hand, completely aware that I was no longer a member of the team I had helped create. No more denial, no more excuses. They hadn't just claimed credit for my efforts. They had rewritten the entire history and removed me from it. That acknowledgement didn't crush me. It ignited something within. I began to see situations for what they truly were. The insincere smiles, the condescending compliments, the way people's eyes would pass over me in meetings, as if I were part of the decor. I started to hear whispers I hadn't perceived before. Is she still involved with this project? Or didn't Leo design that entire back end? It was maddening, but the most painful part? I had enabled them by remaining silent, by placing my trust in the wrong individuals, by not pushing back the first time they diminished my contributions. Never again. I dedicated every evening that week to compiling a complete technical timeline, my architectural diagrams, version histories, and commit logs. I even exported Zoom transcripts from initial design meetings, where Raymond had lauded my system as revolutionary. But the real breakthrough occurred when I searched the company's shared drive for a file I had uploaded early in the project. There it was. IP transfer R docx, draft only. It was still marked as a draft. They had never gotten me to sign it. Oh my God. I leaned back in my chair, utterly shocked. After all of this, after they had dismantled my role, stolen my credit, and acted as if I never existed, they had neglected to legally secure the most critical asset I had built. It was absurd, ridiculous, and infuriating. They had founded $1 million deal on a legal blunder. My blunder. That's when the strategy began to form. I didn't need to plead for what was rightfully mine. I didn't even need to face Raymond. Not yet. What I required was leverage, so I contacted an old acquaintance, Kelly, a tech lawyer I had met at a women's leadership summit years ago. We hadn't connected in some time, but as I laid out the circumstances, her tone grew sharp. "They're operating your software without a signed IP agreement?" she asked. "Sharon, that's not just unprofessional. It's potentially disastrous for them, especially if they're already generating revenue from it." I could hardly believe it. I felt a surge of adrenaline and, for the first time in weeks, something akin to elation. "I knew it felt wrong," I said. "It is wrong," she confirmed. "And you're not helpless. You just forgot how much power you hold." Wow, that statement resonated deeply. She was absolutely right. At some point, I had made myself smaller to fit into a space that was never designed to accommodate me. That night, I stood before my bathroom mirror and looked at my reflection, not at the weary eyes or the quiet grief, but at the woman behind them, the creator, the architect, the one who made things function. I whispered to myself, "They believed I was finished, but they have no clue what's about to happen." It's remarkable how lucid everything becomes when you stop seeking approval. Following my conversation with Kelly, I didn't get much sleep, but it was no longer the anxious kind of insomnia. It was the type that stems from concentration, from a clear objective, from the sharp hum of a mind creating something new. Except this time, I wasn't creating a product. I was creating my comeback. The first step was to gather every piece of evidence of my authorship: the technical specifications, the initial architectural plans, early code commits linked to my user ID, Slack conversations, and time-stamped mock-ups bearing my initials. I established a secure cloud folder titled Evidence Do Not Touch and granted Kelly access. She examined the contents and said, "Sharon, this is irrefutable. Frankly, I've seen companies face lawsuits for far less." God, that felt validating to hear. But we weren't going to sue, not initially. Instead, we dispatched something more straightforward and significantly more potent: a cease and desist letter, meticulously drafted, cloaked in legal authority, and delivered straight to Raymond and the company's legal department. The letter explicitly stated the facts: that the foundational system of their flagship healthcare platform was exclusively built by me, that no signed IP transfer had ever been completed, that any continued use or licensing of that system without my express written permission would be treated as a violation of intellectual property rights. We provided them with 7 business days to reply. 7 days. I will never forget the sensation when Kelly clicked send. I shut my eyes and let out a long, deep breath. For the first time in months, I felt my posture straighten. This was happening. This was real. I was reclaiming my voice. The reply did not come from Raymond. It came from the company's general counsel, a cautiously phrased, thinly disguised attempt at intimidation, asserting that I had acted within my scope of employment and thus had no claim to ownership. But their error was obvious. They still could not provide a signed IP transfer document because one did not exist. I anticipated Kelly would be hesitant, but she just laughed. "They're posturing," she said, "and they're aware of it. That's why they aren't threatening legal action. They're worried you'll be the one to sue first." It felt surreal. The very individuals who had once made me feel insignificant were now huddled in conference rooms, trying to figure out how to ensure my silence. The irony was palpable, but I didn't end my efforts there. I quietly reached out to the healthcare client, the $3 million contract they had signed, the platform they had been sold. It had my name all over it, both figuratively and literally. I met their CTO for coffee. We spoke for 2 hours. When I presented my documentation, his face went pale. "You created all of this." "Yes," I stated calmly, "and they are selling it without the legal right to do so." He rubbed his chin, clearly unsettled. "Sharon, we have no desire to be caught in a legal battle. If you had your own company, we would much rather work with you directly." Wait, What? I nearly spilled my coffee. You're saying if I established a business, you would think about switching. Think about it, he said. We would prefer it. My hands were shaking, but not from anxiety, from the sheer possibility. That evening, I submitted the paperwork to establish my own LLC. I named it Keystone Analytics, a reference to the architectural framework I had conceived. It felt dreamlike, filing that application, registering the domain, setting up the business bank account. But even more dreamlike was the knowledge that they had no clue what was unfolding. Raymond probably thought I was still nursing my wounds somewhere in silence, but while he was busy trying to salvage his title, I was busy creating a new one for myself. It all happened more quickly than I had anticipated. Just 3 weeks after registering my LLC and having that discreet coffee with the client's CTO, I got an official request for proposal, addressed not to the company where I used to work, but to me, to Keystone Analytics. They were prepared to sever their relationship with Raymond's firm, and they wanted a new contract. With me, I didn't rush. I had Kelly draft the proposal meticulously, detailing everything: scope, pricing, terms of service, and airtight legal ownership clauses. When we sent it, I half expected the board to waver. They did not. They signed it within 4 days. 4 days. The contract's value was greater than I had ever dreamed, partly because they included a retainer for future platform enhancements, and partly because they valued something Raymond never had. They understood who had actually built the product. The news struck Raymond like a shockwave. He learned of it the same day I did. Apparently, the client's legal team had informed his company that their contract would be terminated effective immediately, citing unresolved legal and compliance risks. It must have been pandemonium. A $3 million deal, collapsing overnight, after they had already promoted it to investors, lauded it in press releases, and based their entire Q4 forecast on it. The following morning, I received a call from someone I hadn't communicated with in months. Priya, a project manager who had always shown me quiet kindness. Her voice was unsteady. "Sharon, what have you done?" I paused, then answered softly, "I took back what belonged to me." She let out a laugh, a mix of astonishment and disbelief. "Raymond is losing it. He bolted from the board meeting this morning. Investors are threatening to withdraw funding." I didn't celebrate, at least not openly, but internally, I had never felt more complete. 2 days later, the company sent out a sterile internal memo. "Due to evolving client relationships and restructuring, we are implementing leadership changes. Effective immediately." Raymond was gone, discredited, dismissed, silenced. No going-away party, no farewell address, just a vacant office, cleared out by lunchtime, his nameplate removed, his legacy undone by a single oversight, a single lie, and a single woman he mistakenly thought he could muzzle. Too bad. A week after his ousting, I entered that same building for a scheduled meeting, this time not as a staff member, but as the CEO of the partner firm. Every set of eyes in the reception area swiveled toward me. Some registered shock, some guilt, and something that looked like admiration. Even Leo appeared dumbfounded as he walked past me in the corridor, and I smiled, not because I sought vengeance, not even because I craved acknowledgement, but because, for the very first time, I wasn't being led into the room. I was the one leading the meeting. We sat across from one another in the glass-walled conference room. Board members, legal counsel, new executives, and me. I outlined the transition plan with professionalism, responded to questions with clarity, and established timelines with precision. No heated words, no resentment, just competence, presence, and authority. At the meeting's conclusion, one of the senior advisors leaned forward and remarked, "We should have been collaborating with you from the start." I nodded. "You still can." And I meant it, because my purpose wasn't to demolish what remained. It was to replace it. It's strange how serene everything felt in the aftermath. No grand celebrations, no dramatic pronouncements, just a profound, steady tranquility that washed over my life like the first morning following a major storm. I was working harder than ever, heading a small but formidable team at Keystone Analytics. We had new clients, new projects, and for the first time in years, I felt visible, not just for my output, but for who I was. My daughter noticed it as well. "You smile a lot more now, Mommy," she observed one night as I was tucking her into bed. I kissed her forehead and murmured, "I feel more like myself again." There were still moments when I reflected on Raymond, on that office building, on the years I had wasted waiting for external validation. But those thoughts no longer carried a sting. They served as a reminder of how much I had grown, and how simple it is to get lost in the clamor of ambition and the need for approval. I didn't have to burn down any bridges. I just needed to construct my own. A month later, I drove past the old office building. The glass facade mirrored the sunlight, just as it always had, but inside, everything had been transformed, and so had I. I was no longer invisible, because I had finally stopped requesting to be seen and had started to claim my own space instead. Too many of us devote years, sometimes entire careers, to organizations that never truly recognize us. We diminish ourselves to conform to systems not designed for us, believing that our hard work will ultimately be noticed. But sometimes, you have to be your own advocate. You don't require permission to reclaim what is yours. You don't need validation to affirm your worth. You simply need a single moment of courage. Have you ever stayed quiet when you should have spoken out, or walked away when you knew it was the right time? Share your own experience in the comments. You never know whose voice you might help rediscover.